That was the most wonderful welcome. Thank you so much. That was the welcome by Catherine Martin herself. And now from myself, I'd like to say hello to everyone. Welcome to all of you. I can feel your presence, even though you are hidden in the dark, deep hole on my computer. And especially warm welcome to Catherine Martin, our esteemed guest tonight. My name is Dorota Glowacka. I'm a professor at the University of King's College, and I will be a moderator of tonight's event. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the university where I teach, where I'm actually sitting right now in my office, is located in Chabaktak in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqiyik, and Passamaquoddy peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties by which all people of this land are obligated. I would also like to extend gratitude to the ancestors of this land, as well as to the ancestors of the lands where you come from or wherever you may be sitting in front of your computers right now. This event is brought to you by the Counter-Memory Activism Research Group, and we are an interdisciplinary research creation project between artists, museologists, curators, scholars of genocide and memory studies. And we are exploring the current questions and historical context of memory activism, themes such as collective memory, the commemoration of heritage, and how to speak and how to converse about difficult histories. The research project has been funded by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, but it's an Insight Development Grant, and the project is a partnership between Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and the University of King's College in Chabaktak. Let me just add that since our partnership is deeply committed to addressing themes of contested, violent, and painful histories, I would also like to acknowledge that yesterday, which was March 21st, we observed the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. In Canada this year, the commemoration is marked by, or I would rather say marred by the release earlier today of the findings that the Saskatchewan police discriminated on the basis of race against the mother of Colton Bushy, an Indigenous man killed by a white man, and the murder of which the killer was acquitted. So I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the pain, injustice, and indignity suffered by Colton Bushy's family. I would like to, before I introduce our esteemed speaker, let me just say a few words about the protocols, why I have everyone's attention. The presentation will be about 30 minutes, 40 or more. We will see, well, we think about 40 minutes perhaps, and it will be followed by a Q&A session, which I will moderate. You can type your questions in the Q&A chat feature. I will be the only one who can access those questions, and so I will then pose those questions to the speaker. So please just type them in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And let me quickly also invite you to our following events. The next one is on March 30th. It is our guest will be Nicholas Galanin, who is a Tlingit Anangan artist residing in Sitka, Alaska, and whose work addresses questions of collective memory and the connections between memory and land. And then on April the 7th, we have Wambui Kamiru, who is a Kenyan artist whose work focuses on issues of decolonization, identity, and independence in Africa. This will be followed by another series of lectures. So please look it up on our website, countermemoryactivism.ca. We are also on Facebook and Instagram, easy to find. Please keep coming. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Catherine Martin. Catherine Martin has been recognized as the first Mi'kmaw filmmaker in the Atlantic region. She's the creator of several award-winning documentaries about her community. Let me mention a few. Shirley Bear, Mignon Mignon in 1990. This is a portrait of a Maliseet artist, Shirley Bear. Then Kwanu Te, Mi'kmaq, and Maliseet artists in 1991. Spirit Wind in 2000. The Spirit of Annie Mae, 2002. There was a documentary about Annie Mae Aquash, a Mi'kmaq activist and member of the American Indian movement, who was murdered in 1975 following the standoff at Wounded Knee near the Pine Ridge Reservation, if you recall. And then in 2004, a little boy who lived with Muni Squaw, which is a bear woman, I believe. And I understand that Catherine's latest project is Basket Maker, and that film is just about to premiere at Sarasota Native Film Festival. And I'm hoping to hear more about that project tonight. Some of Catherine's most notable awards include WAVE Award from Women in Film and Television Atlantic in 2015. She's the recipient of the Order of Canada in 2017 and of the Senate 150 Medal in 2019. Besides her work in film, Catherine has worked tirelessly to increase access to education and opportunities for Indigenous peoples, especially to support Indigenous artists working with Canadian arts organizations. And she has lectured widely at universities across Canada and the US and elsewhere. I just found out she just participated in a panel in Ireland yesterday, for instance. And so she speaks mostly on Indigenous history and culture. As a professor, for me, equally invaluable is her work at the post-secondary institutions in Shabaktak. She helped develop the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaw law program at the Dalhousie Law School. Just to give you a sample, in 2015, she was Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount Saint Vincent University. She's currently Dalhousie's first Director of Indigenous Community Engagement. I understand returning to Dalhousie a few decades after graduating from Dal with a degree in theater arts. As a professor at King's, I am especially grateful for Catherine's years of service, ongoing service on King's Board of Governors. And I have been inspired every time I have heard Catherine speak or drum or whenever we just talked. So I am delighted to be hosting Catherine Martin tonight as part of our Counter Memory Activism lecture series and to share this experience with you. So welcome, Cathy.
Wow, thank you very much. That was quite a introduction. You'll have to, I apologize for my car. We're full of our gear and luggage and things that we need to get where we're going. We're on our way to Cape Breton. Can't wait. Madawalokiok, Nin Gadalinan Maltai, Welly Giskok. It's such a beautiful day. I want to welcome all of you to our unceded territory of the Ulnu, known today as Mi'kmaw, but the original name for us is Ulnu. When the French and then the British, our new immigrants, came, they thought we were introducing who we are as a tribe. We were introducing our relatives to one another, to them, because we're all related, and especially under the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Willistok, Mi'kmaw, we're all under that confederacy, the Abenaki. And so we were introducing our relatives, Nogama or Nigama, my relative or our relatives. And somehow it sounded to them like Micmac. So that's where we're at today. So I welcome you to the land or the territory of the Ulnu, to the territory of the Mi'kmaw, Mi'kma'ki, and thank you very much, Dorota, for not just the introduction, but for acknowledging our territory. That seems to have become something really important in the last 5 or 7 years, wherever I go. It's something we've been asking for over 500 years, the acknowledgement that this is our land, this is our territory, and we've only signed a peace and friendship treaty with the British. And that's a unique treaty, and it never gave up anything. We never gave up our land. We were never conquered. We just found that there was a stage where the British had kept trying to get rid of us. And so there was lots of conflict between the two nations. And at one point, we all agreed to signing a peace and friendship treaty. And so we have held up our bargain, but the British, Canadian, now the Canadian government did not. And so for 250 years, many of our, my ancestors, my relatives, both sides, my grandparents on both sides, my dad, suffered immensely from the denial of our rights. And so a lot of the history and the stories about us had to be kept underground, because in this country, there was a law within the Indian Act that didn't allow us to speak our language or to do our ceremonies. And the Indian Act also didn't allow us to gather within our community and have any kind of conversations. Like, we could not organize under the Indian Act. So with the disconnect that we have experienced, where most of our stories and our language and our culture had to be hidden and cared for by, we call the caretakers of our language and our culture. And there's many of them, and they keep coming forward now that it's okay in this country for us to speak our language and to sing and do our ceremonies. People have been for many years, since the 60s, since when we were given the right to vote in the country. We never had a right to vote until 1960. And things began to change. So people who were the caretakers of our culture started to bring back or bring out those things that they kept. Sarah Denny has been one of the most important knowledge keepers in my life and in many lives. She passed away several years ago, but she devoted her life to teaching and sharing and bringing us all together and learning about our ways. So I wanted to honor her. The song that I sung as we were waiting, I sung Guanu Day, came from, and now I'm going to start getting into the talk. So I'm starting with Sarah because it was Sarah that gave me a lot of the confidence to be who I am and to do the things that I do. One of them being singing. And Sarah taught me right away that we are all given gifts in this world. And some of us, we don't even know what those gifts are, and we leave the earth before we do. But when you know you have a gift, you're meant to share that gift. So she taught me that wherever I go, share my gift of singing at celebrations, at funerals, when people are dying or when they're trying to get better. Any kind of gathering is a celebration. Life and death in our world are part of a cycle, and both are celebrations. So I acknowledge her, and she taught me that I should sing Guanu Day whenever I'm coming to a gathering, whether I'm coming here to welcome you to our territory, that I should sing this. And what does this do? Well, first of all, this beautiful drum made by my good late friend Kevin Sack from Shibanaki. The drum represents the heartbeat of Mother Earth and the heartbeat of our mother. And Mother Earth gives us everything that we need to survive. She nurtures us, she gives us air and water, plants, animals, everything. And Grandmother Moon, she makes sure everything goes around. The cycle of the ocean, the tides, the day and the night belong to our with Grandmother Moon. And so when I drum, I'm not just drumming I don't drum for entertainment. It's a way of asking and acknowledging my ancestors. And for some of us who use this drum for ceremony, we're inviting our ancestors to come be with us while we're doing what we're doing, to guide us. So tonight I've asked them by drumming to come be with me and to help me make sure that I tell the truth, that if I speak from my heart, as they told us all, then we are speaking the truth, and we're speaking the language of our mother, of Mother Earth, and of our own mother, that all of us know, that we all know this language. It's the heartbeat that we heard while we were inside of our mother, and it's the language we all first learned. So when we speak from our heart, we are speaking a language that all people know. And once you do that, no matter what other language you speak, Sarah tells me that it's everybody can understand when we speak from the heart, regardless of the language we speak after. So now, what does the drum, what else the drum does for me is, like for my good friend Dorota, it helps us to connect as one. All of you who have come tonight, it brings us all together, and hopefully we're trying to beat, our heart is beating together, and we can maybe clear out some of what happened today so that we can be open to whatever gifts we are going to be brought through this time. I'm not a speaker of my language. I know lots of words, and I know when anybody in my family is talking about me. But as far as being fluent, I don't have that. And it is, you know, I have been learning as I go, but it certainly has been an obstacle for sure as a Mi'kmaw not to know the language, because the language is what helps us to know how to be Ulnu. It teaches us everything we know. It teaches us about how to be in the land, how to connect with our land, how to listen to the land and listen to the earth. And I think with COVID over the last year, that experience has been brought home to me so well, because when you look out, even though COVID has brought us grief, there are things that it has brought that we cannot ignore. And that is the nature around us has changed, and the animals and the birds and different species have decided to show up again, because it's been safer without airplanes and people and pollution and everything that interferes, clear cutting all those with nature. And we see it. My husband and I see it every day, the difference of the kinds of species that are showing up around us. So there's a few things we have to see. It's a silver lining. It's not a nice one, but it's the one that sees that we can bring back the earth. We can bring back the earth to a place where it will be available for the 7 future generations. The 1752 treaty was signed by my ancestors, and I'm the relative or descendant of 2 of the signatories. And so to me, it's so important whenever I'm asked to speak or that I bring up the Peace and Friendship Treaty and remind us all that we are all here and we're all part of the treaty, our nation and your nation. So, you know, that is supposed to help us to take care of the earth. It's also one of the things that, you know, we're talking about memory. And so how is it that I can go back without my language, without a control or handle on my language, without a whole bunch of written history that we didn't have? Silas T. Rand in the mid 1800s came and saw the need, he thought, for us to have a written language. So he created a written language. Leclerc also came and saw that we were using hieroglyphics. So he used the hieroglyphics to try to write a little bit about the Catholic ways. But the 1752 treaty, like the 1725 and the 63 treaty, they're just proof that, one, our ancestors followed the traditional way of any decision they were making, like the signing of a peace and friendship treaty between nations about our territory, about our earth. Anything that involves that is certainly a testament to the fact that they made a decision thinking about the 7 generations before and the 7 generations ahead. And I know, because of the Supreme Court decision that validated our treaty, I know that they were thinking about me. And I know that because the treaty is valid and it has brought back a way of life, or the opening for our way of life for us as Mi'kmaw to live in peace and friendship, and as well to practice our ways of gathering, hunting, fishing, that we always had the right, and we still have the right, and we will forever because of that treaty. But making stories and writing making films about our history is very challenging because you don't have very much visuals over those past 500 years done by us or done about us. You don't have many photographs, visuals, and very little writing until, recently during this Renaissance when we're just seeing all kinds of writers from our communities coming forward. Because it's safe. It's okay to do that now, for the most part. So the living memory, I've always known that I know things that nobody told me. And I've known that since I was quite young, when I would, call out to my dad in the middle of the night with a dream, specifically once about my uncle who was hurt. And he was living in a couple cities over. And I called him out and said, my Uncle Mickey's hurt. You have to go find him. And sure enough, he had been hurt and he ended up in the hospital. And I just knew it because it's not a magic thing. It's something that the Ulnu, the Mi'kmaw, and many other nations had for 14,000 years here. The ability to communicate with nature, to understand the animals, to understand and why we consider the animals, the fish, all of our relatives is because they are. Because without them, we cannot be living in the best way we can. If we've destroyed species and plants and animals and fish that we consider part of our circle of family, our relatives, who we rely on as part of what they call the food chain or the link. We rely on that and we give thanks to them. We give thanks to the animals whenever we were for 14,000 and still. And whenever we hunted and fished and gathered, we always offered our thanks to the animal or the plant that was giving its life for us to survive. And so, well, that might seem like just something you do as just an acknowledgement. To me, it is a way to continue our tradition. And we know that through our oral history and through our language, that has to be done in order to maintain peace and friendship with our own relatives. We come from the earth. The Mi'kmaw, the Ulnu, the Wabanaki, we come from the earth. Our creation story that's very not known by the general public because it was never allowed to be spoken. But our creation story speaks of us coming from the earth, that we're red earth people, and that we came from the earth when a lightning bolt hit the sand, a figure was formed. The second bolt, a figure sat up, and the third bolt, the figure began to walk and learn about our family and who we are. And we know this because the oral history that we have maintained for 14,000 years affirms all of this with us. The other things that I do when I make a film is I spend a lot of time with the speakers of our community, with the knowledge holders of our community, and with the elders to find out, what is it that we want to tell and what don't we want to tell. And so I usually get quite a bit of support and help from them before I start and all the way through the process and after. So I do know from many of the experiences I've had with making films, there's more going on than just researching what we can read and see. And I think that one of the first times I made a film, I was making a film for the film board called Guanude about Mi'kmaw and Willistok or Maliseet artists. It was my first film. And I visited Shirley Bear to begin some work with her because she is in that film. And she immediately said, no, wait, you need to come in here. And she brought me in to do a ceremony. She did a pipe ceremony to help me begin my journey on this film, this story that I was going to tell, and to get help from the spirits and to get help from our ancestors. And she told me that with your, before you begin something, no matter what it is, a song, a story, writing, a dance, anything you're going to create, that you need to do something to prepare and for your process. And so she told me that I needed to make sure that I did my ceremony first, and that would help me to get through and make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And to constantly thank the ancestors and those who are sharing that ancient knowledge with me. And when I learned that, when she shared that with me, she did a ceremony for me. And I realized then how important it was that I connect more with my own spirituality. And it did a lot. That particular time, we arrived because she had asked me if I would make a little film, sign up for a competition called 5 Feminist Minutes with the National Film Board and Studio D, the long lost Women's Studio D of the NFB. And I received one of the scholarships of the 16 films that were made of a 5-minute film on feminism in Canada at that time. So she had asked me, because so many people had asked her if they could make a 5-minute film on her. She had asked me if I would submit a proposal because she wanted an Indigenous woman, and even better, a Mi'kmaw or Willistic woman, to do this documentary. So in fact, Mingwan Mingwan became my first film, even though I was in the middle of my first larger film, Guanude, with the film board. This one came and was produced and released before Guanude. It was released in 1990 and Guanude in 91. So that wasn't my only experience, having a ceremony or, knowing there was something, one of my relatives or close people in my life were in trouble and needed me. I was raised to understand messages that were coming, forerunners. I was raised that way. I was told all kinds of stories about how we need to, stories about that, and then to be open to it and not to be afraid of it, because that's how our ancestors communicated for 14,000 years with this earth and the sky. There was nothing else. There were no buildings, there were no priests, there were no, it was just us and nature and the stars and the sky and the moon. And so we also developed that sixth sense, which is not as developed as it was because of the 500 years of oppression and denying us the ability and the right to live our way. So it's about, I think I've been here for about 20 minutes now. And I want to talk about a few of the films. And while I'm talking about them, the reason I am is because of this memory that lives within us, that it lives in my DNA. And I always knew it, but it certainly wasn't something that many people in my life accepted. And now we're learning today that, DNA and memory and things like that may have some place in this society. So there's people like Albert Marshall, Shirley Bear, all kinds of elders from my area and people I've met who have shared with me stories that are not written, and they've come from a long time ago. One of my early experiences was with a project that I was doing with the Robert S. Peabody Museum in Boston, outside of Boston, Massachusetts, led by a good friend, Leah Rosemeyer, who is now working here with the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaw at the Mi'kmaw Way Divert site. She came and brought some photographs, and to make a long story short, these photographs were tiny little photographs of a time in 1930 when an ethnographer, Frederick Johnson, came and was commissioned by a foundation to go around and capture the life of Indigenous communities. 4 of them were Mi'kmaw communities: Newfoundland's Con River, my community Millbrook, Pictou Landing near Pictou, and 1, 2, 3, and Waikagama. So the Smithsonian, I mean, Robert S. Peabody and the Smithsonian was connected to this collection, wanted us to help them identify what these photographs and who they are, because they had lost Frederick Johnson's field notes. They had a few notes, but not much. So they didn't really know who these people were or where they were from. So they wanted us to do that. I said, well, the only way to do that is to bring it to the community. And she said, yes. And I said, but we can't bring these photographs to the community and then take them away. If any of these families see these beautiful photographs, well taken, of 1930, most people have none of these pictures. They don't even have a picture of them. So I couldn't go into the community and say, hey, help us out, and then we'll see you later. So Leah is just one of those wonderful allies who understands how to work well with us. And so she ended up, in a long story, getting some funding and getting everybody on board, Canada, the United States, to do an exhibit, a show that would tour both Canada and the United States. And she found funds to take the photographs and blow them up to life size and have them all done, done professionally. And so, and with the other part of this exhibit, there needed to be information about the photographs. So I was brought in to film and bring Leah and a couple others to our community to gather with elders from those 4 communities. And I filmed the sessions where they were, for the first time, given a copy of the photographs. So probably each session had at least 10 elders. And so when we brought them out, it just gave me that, it just affirmed once again that we carry everything in our DNA. There is a collective consciousness, a collective memory, and it still exists because, because of the oral history working well with our DNA and our remembering our history inside of us. Because of that, these elders were able to identify their grandmothers and their great-grandparents and cousins and brothers and sisters that they had never seen, because they knew their stories. And they knew that this one lived there and this one's family had this many. And so with the little bit of writing that Frederick Johnson provided in his little tiny notes, we were able to fill in stories of each photograph, stories that the elders remembered. And that was what just had me awestruck. They remembered these people's faces. They identified their names, their houses, the roofs, everything from memory, from living memory, and from collective memory. So that was what gave me a lot more understanding and affirmation that this does exist, then I really don't care what anyone else thinks. Because a lot of times when I speak about in my films about ceremonies and, you know, connecting with ancestors, I have often been told that that's incredulous. So we probably shouldn't leave that in the film. Let's not put that there. And I just couldn't wait until I started making my films myself, by myself, without anybody trying to, except for my elders, trying to tell me how things are. So through that lens, I continued to make many films since that time. And the Remember in the Old Mi'kmaw ended up becoming a book. So you can go find the book and you can read the stories by these incredible elders with these incredible memories. And from there on, I had been making other films. I made another film with the National Film Board Mi'kmaw family, where my son, who was born during that time, it was his journey, his birth to the extended Mi'kmaw family. And there again, you know, when I spoke to people, they told me about ancient customs and traditions that many people don't know today. And I could only uh, you know, affirm that that comes from the oral tradition, the original way of our communication. Then we'll step a little bit on, because I've made several films, but one of them lately has been The Spirit Wind I did in 1992. Spirit Wind was a canoe journey. Chief Marcel Joe of Maui Bugik First Nation in Conn River, Newfoundland, had a vision to build a traditional birch bark canoe with no hardware, just spruce gum, bear grease, birch bark, and sinew, and spruce roots, and paddle it across from Newfoundland to Nova Scotia in time to the traditional annual gathering of the Mi'kmaw at Chapel Island. And so he had this vision, and the film, it will speak for itself, but the vision was not only to paddle it, because it had been 100 years since our people had done this trip, while they had done it often for 14,000 years. So he gathered several guys from the community, and a lot of women helped deal with this building and project. And they built the birch bark canoe, and I had asked if I could maybe go record this journey. I thought it would be a couple of weeks, but in the end, he said yes. He called me up about a couple of weeks before the journey and said, the canoe's ready and we're going. Come on up. And I said, well, it's not that easy. But anyway, in the end, I did get some costs in kind for this journey. And it took 3 years and 3 attempts, and I won't tell you the rest. That's up to you to watch the film. But during that journey, we had lots of issues, lots of problems, all kinds of things. But the one thing that I learned from those experiences was I was remembering my own great-grandmother and great-grandfather and my granddad, who crossed this water in birch bark canoes, who did this. And everybody on that journey, we all connected with our ancestors, and we received teachings from the journey, from especially the hardships that we encountered and all the things we learned that we don't know. We were taught again by the ancestors. The point of that journey was to heal our nation, because there had been such a separation between Conn River and the rest of Mi'kma'ki, the 7 hunting districts, and to heal their own community, which had gone through lots of struggles in order to reclaim their identity and their status. So that helped, that worked. When we arrived, I know that it gave thousands of people a very good sense of connection to their ancestry. But more than ever, I learned so much about me. And I learned about my great-grandmother and my great-grandfather, who I never knew. And only 1 or 2 pictures are available of my grandfather and none of my great-grandmother. But I learned from her. I traveled her route and I learned from her. And it gave me a lot of courage to go ahead and do the film I always wanted to do. And that was to tell the story of Annie Mae Aquash, a Mi'kmaw woman from Shubenacadie who was murdered in South Dakota after the Wounded Knee um, protests and blockades. She stayed down there and she was murdered. And it was always said that it was the FBI that did it. But in the end, after 30 years and lots of work by the daughters and the sisters, 2 Native men were charged who were members of the American Indian movement. But all that time, I was researching and working with her daughters and her family. There was no doubt in my mind that Annie Mae was with me, and she was guiding me, and she was trying to make sure I didn't get in trouble or hang out with the wrong people, because there was a lot of wrong people in that time that that hurt Annie Mae and have lived their lives talking about as if she's their best friend. So during that time, I learned a lot. I had lots of dreams and lots of visions and lots of experiences from Annie Mae. I have no other doubt than it was from her. So The Spirit of Annie Mae, it was a beautiful film about her life, and I made sure it was told by those that knew her, that really knew her. And it also gave hope to all of the women and families of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and victims of violence, that if they continue to look and don't give up, and if your generation goes by, the next generation will pick it up. It gave them hope that if they continue to stay with it, the truth will come out. There will be a truth, and that is what happened. So it was, twofold. It was for us to celebrate her life, but also to remind everybody that had anything to do with her murder. And it was quite a conspiracy amongst the American Indian movement. Perhaps the FBI was involved, but for sure, there's no doubt that there was members of AIM that were also involved in her demise. But it gave us hope, and it told me all the time that she was there. And if I was doing something wrong, I found that out quickly. And I also was guided by her 2 daughters, Denise and Deborah, and her 2 sisters, Hubba and Becky, and her best friend who just died 2 weeks ago, Linda Cookie Maloney. And they told me about her life. And they told me when I would meet somebody, we would talk about them and they would decide whether that was a friend of Annie Mae's or not. And it wasn't because they knew them. It was because we were all connected, especially the daughters and the sisters, to Annie Mae. So that's Spirit of Annie Mae was in 2000. And since that time, I was able to make some of my own films. And one of the films that I made in just this past few years is called Basket Maker. And Basket Maker, it was a gift to me. It was just like somebody said, here, Kath, now you can do something, do something all by yourself and do what you want. So the Samuel Foundation, Kim Samuel and the foundation, and the Princess School of Traditional Arts, Princess Charity Schools of Traditional Art, funded me to make a film about the contribution of women to traditional arts and to the economy. And I couldn't help but, right away, it was Basket Makers, because they have been my teachers. I work closely with them. They helped me through a lot in my life. Baskets hold memory. And I always knew they held memory. I would hold a basket and I could get the sense of the basket maker, even if it was 100 years old, no name on it. I just could feel something in those baskets. And it felt like memory. And so when I decided basket making, of course, was the thing I wanted to do, I started to speak to basket makers, and I collected all of my old footage. Like, some of it is terrible. Some is 8mm and high 8 and not mic'd, but I collected all the material I've had produced or directed or filmed since the late 70s, early 80s. And then some really beautiful pieces that my husband and I have done for different organizations. And I brought those images all together with some archival stuff and started to tell the story. But as always, it's really difficult to get to the real story once you have so much you want to tell. And I was told in ceremony that the basket makers wanted me to tell the good part of their story, of their life, and to leave the negative stuff, all the horrible things that happened to our basket makers, leave that alone, because this was a celebration of them. So I got some great help from people like Albert Marshall, like Caroline Gould. Even though she had passed, we had a lot of footage of her. Lots of basket makers that we know today, the great basket makers of today. And we were able to tell a story about the basket makers pre-contact, contact, and today. And it's a beautiful story, and it's a tribute to the people, to the Ulnu, to the Mi'kmaw. And I just love the film. Like, I just saw it the other day and I said, wow, that's such a great visit with all of the basket makers that I knew. It was such a great visit. And every time I see it, it's a great visit. So the beauty of that film is that the Samuel Foundation and the Princess School said in the end, well, this is yours. This is your film. They have the rights to use it for certain things in their school and in the foundation, but that this was mine, and it was for me, and it belonged to the people, the Ulnu people. So that's like very special, to be given that freedom, and then to it just be given to me to do what I want. So it's taken a little while. It was finished kind of in 2019, and then we did a little more work in 2020. So it's pretty close to its release. And as I said earlier, it has to be first seen by the community to make sure. You still there, everyone?
Yes, it was a brief disruption, but you are on.
That was
There you go.
a phone call. So here I am. I've wrapped up almost everything. I want to sing Basket Maker just to honor them. And I want to take some questions so that probably I didn't even touch upon it. My sister wrote the words. She's a poet and a writer and an artist, and I put music to it because I'm often asked to sing this at celebrations of life and death. So I put some music to it. Basket maker, basket maker, old woman with the laughing brown in your eyes, sinewy, leathery hands, child would see. You are the mystery of dawn. What thoughts have you as you sit so silently, making works of wooden lines, weaving my basket down, in and out, all around. My basket so fine. Whisko, whisko, whisko. Basket maker, basket maker. Old woman with the laughing brown in your eyes. Sinewy, leathery hand, so strongly defined. A basket maker, basket maker, basket maker. Home keeper of time. Home keeper of time. Oh. So with that, I will be happy to answer or listen to comments. The baskets, funny, yeah, just the other day I was on the Wabanaki Confederacy's equinox gathering, their spring gathering to welcome the spring. And Ron Tremblay, who is the Grand Chief of the Willistic people, the people of the Grand River, some people know them as Maliseets, but that's not their real name. He told a story about the Willistic people and a legend, not a legend, a story about the significance of the basket and how the basket, every part of the process and every part of the building of it and each thing that happens, including the rim, is connected to us as a family. It tells the story of who we are. It's a fascinating story, and maybe someday we'll get Ron to tell it so everybody can hear it. But once again, I was just yesterday just reaffirmed that the things I think and that I don't know where they all ever come from are truly are real. And it's been a difficult time. I think Renate Usamadi, who was at the University of Winnipeg, and I met her through this process, a conference called the Oral Histories, and Renate and Renee from St. Mary's University both did this conference and brought together all kinds of Mi'kmaw storytellers, and they wrote a report. A book is out there, and it was all about the oral tradition and living memory. And I wrote a piece in that about just what I've told you about filmmaking, living memory, and its connection to the earth. Because we are from the earth, the memory is in the earth. Scientists call it, layers and layers of, sediments that can tell you the story. Well, so can the earth can tell us stories if we understand how to listen and we understand what those messages are. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and probably we'll get Renata. I was going to say Renata. She passed away several years ago, but she must be here. Dorota, to please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathy. It always moves me when we talk. And I don't know, maybe because I'm an immigrant in Nova Scotia, so that just gives me an appreciation of the gift I have received by being welcome here. So I just feel that, especially when you talk or when we talk together. So I wonder if there are any questions or comments coming in. I don't see any in my Q&A.
I have a first question, Dorota, if that's okay. Can I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
I can jump on it first. Okay, sorry, I just really eager. I'm eager to ask this question, and thank you so much, Kathy. That was wonderful. And I just wondering, as a filmmaker, I have a very specific filmmaking nerdy question. I'm curious about your process of making films, and film itself, as you know, can be such a hierarchical and sort of like unfriendly, can be the way certain people make it, very unfriendly to collaboration. And the way that you make films is just so much about a community and unfolding of stories and discovering. And I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit about your process, and maybe we can learn a bit from that process and how that is so indicative to, like, what your goal as a filmmaker is and what your goal is in sharing your work with the community.
Well, I've lived in a life with both my parents, my Mi'kmaw parents, and great grandparents and grandparents, and like a huge extended family where stories were the greatest thing, and storytelling has been a part of our lives since time immemorial. So I love stories, and a lot of times we get told stories about ourselves that we don't even know are about us. They're kind of ways to guide us and give us a couple lessons if we're doing something wrong or something. We might be told a story about somebody else, and then we realize, oh, that must be me. It's also used to help people and guide them in their ways. My process evolved. I wasn't a filmmaker. I didn't go to school for filmmaking. I was invited by Jermaine Wong of the National Film Board. At the time, she was the executive producer, and she wanted a film made about Mi'kmaw and Maliseet art, and she wanted me to help find a director. So we looked and looked, and most of the artists didn't want to direct. They wanted to be in the film. So eventually she said, why don't you just make it? You know a lot about it. You have to know about the subject and your vision. So I was given the opportunity with Kim McTaggart, who just graduated from film school, and Kent Nason, a cinematographer, to work on this film. And that's how that came about. But it was the process in learning how to navigate through the communities. I already knew most of these people I was going to go visit. So you already hold that knowledge and that cultural property and the connection and relationship, but you still need to build a relationship. So the beauty of NFB's work time is that they give you time to do your research and they actually pay you. And so I spent a lot of time doing my preliminary research, building my relationships with those that I wanted to join us in this film. And that's where I begin, and I learned from a lot about filmmaking, about storytelling, and about ceremony. I'd also learned earlier on, I graduated with a degree in theater, my first degree at Dal. And, I knew the importance of being a good storyteller or a good actress. So I had that, and I had, all kinds of good friends and relations in the Indigenous community in this region. So I think as a Mi'kmaw filmmaker making films in the community, that doesn't mean everybody who's a Mi'kmaw has relationships and is connected to their community. But I was, and I am closer and closer at each film I make. I had spent like 5 or 6 years with 4 Mi'kmaw arts corporations in the 4 Atlantic provinces. And my board of directors, 10 and 12 each board, were all Mi'kmaw women basketballers. So I can tell you that was the greatest education and the most fun and lots of difficulty I had ever had in most of the work I've ever done. So I credit them, and I credit those that have gone and have trusted me with their stories. and trusted me to tell the right story and make sure with them that it's true. And so, there's been some bumps along the way, that's for sure. But yeah, that's what I do. I start talking to people about the subject, and I learn who's best, who they think is better, is the best one to speak to. And I think I answered that question. Did I?
Absolutely, thank you.
In the meantime, I have a question in the chat here
Mhm.
from Sarah Clift. Your filmmaking is so rooted in community and relationships. Do you incorporate mentorship into your artistic practices?
Well, when there is an opportunity funding wise, like most of the films I've made, except for the National Film Board films, I've had to go and find the funding. And I've a lot of times shot a lot of it, edited a lot of it. And so it's a luxury if I could mentor anybody. I have tried, some with luck and some not, to involve Mi'kmaw in the creative positions, in the creative control positions. It's hard. It's hard to mentor people because of the energy and concentration and connection that I make with everybody. So, I'm interested in mentoring with people who are making films, but it's really hard for me to get somebody to come along my road because it's usually not a funded road. And, I don't think working with me is the easiest thing. You can ask my husband. But I do work closely with my husband because he knows me. So I wouldn't want to, I'm not saying I'm a bad person to work with, but there's a lot of responsibility to mentoring. And if you're asking whether I'd consider mentoring, I have mentored. It's sometimes it works. And so if that's what you're thinking, we can talk later.
Great. I don't see anything in the Q&A. I just have a quick association. The way you talk about basket making as a kind of really most important, like almost crowning project of your filmmaking career, it sounds to me like you are talking about filmmaking, as if filmmaking were like weaving baskets. And in everything you say, it's also interconnected and like interwoven. So I just wonder whether there is this kind of sense of cultural continuity in your kind of weaving your films, even when you are like in that canoe, it's also this kind of same kind of movement. I just feel the same kind of movement through everything you say, every cultural practice that you have described.
Yeah. Well, it's always an honor to be allowed and invited into somebody's world. And I take that very seriously. And so I'm very careful how I enter and how I stay with them and that I maintain my relationships. We were just invited about 5-6 years ago to go on an 8-day canoe journey with Elizabeth Panashaway she's Innu from Sheshashi. And she does this canoe journey, or did it every year. The one we went on was the last one she did. And she does it in order to check on the wildlife, her relatives, the fish, the bear, and to see what the falls, what are they? The dams, the falls have been dammed for electricity and energy. And she goes and sees what has happened to, what is the damage being done to the wildlife, to the banks, to the trees. And it's a way, just like that Michelle Joe's canoe journey from Newfoundland. It's like reclaiming and continuing that journey, continuing to do the traditional journeys so that we maintain that, not just the connection, but it's ours. It's our place, and we need to continue to guard it and be connected with it. So I have found myself wanting to do films that I had no idea what was actually in store for me. So that's a good thing, to be kind of naive, but you learn along the way to be careful with what you wish for. And I'm so grateful for people trusting me, like Elizabeth Panashaway and Isel Joe. So I don't think, Dorota, I got to the point of your question, except that it is a weaving, because, like a basket, you start with a log, a tree, you cut it down, you pound it, you cut it in quarters, you strip it, you then pound it again and get splints, and then you pound it again, and then you start to scrape them so they're smooth, and then you work with them on lengths. Then you start to weave the basket. Like, that's just a little part of the process. But the weaving of the basket, just like a lot of my films, and also the weaving of all of my films together, I'm hoping are just like that strong basket that will stay forever. Baskets last hundreds of years, and they're made with not just knowledge. Basket making is a way of life for families. All the family in the past would make the basket, little children crawling around on the floor playing with the splints, and all the way up to the elders and the man who does the hoop and the woman that does the weaving. And it's a balanced thing. And so, like my films, I try to make sure I get as much in as I can, but I also make sure that it's strong and it can hold the test of time. And it will hold it so that in 7 generations, when Mi'kmaw youth or Ulnu are looking for who they are and want to know about our ways, our traditions, they might be able to find a couple of films of those that I have asked to voice, to speak in the films. I don't try to be the one to speak. I narrate my films, but it's only to connect the thoughts. I try as much as I can to make sure that the voice is heard in the way that they are offering it to us. And a lot of it is sacred, and so is the basket to me. It's amazing making a basket. And I have to admit, I have filmed a lot of basket makers and basket making, and I've only made a few, and they're not completely finished and they're not great. But I do have a few. But like my mom is a basket maker, my niece is learning from her. So many of my friends are basket makers, and I'm the one running around trying to preserve it so that in 100 years that a young person will know who they are, and they don't have to rely on the one-sided horrible stories in history that was written by those who came here 500 years ago and decided to be a voice that they shouldn't have been. So, and that has confused us a lot, and other people's traditions from across the country. So that's why I do this work, is to try to, as much as I can, record and save our ways and our language and our traditions. How's that?
Great, thank you. This is to be continued, but I have a question from the chat, and
Okay.
it's from Barbara and Bob. And hello to you across the street.
Oh, yes. I know who they are.
Of course. Actually, I remember how all 4 of us, we were in, you were showing us the, no, well, anyway, I will say that later. Just a memory of all of us together. So here we are on the computer together. Hi, and thank you, Kathy, from Barbara and Bob. It was great to
Oh,
see an early version of Basket Maker a few years ago. It
mhm,
made me very aware of the connections to the women in your family. And the
mhm.
question is, when will the final version of the film be screened here? And Barbara and Bob wish you a safe drive to Unamaki.
The land of the fog. I will let you know. Everybody will know when it's going to be screened. We did a what was it, like we called it a sneak preview for the Halifax libraries about 2 years ago, and I think that's when Barb and Bob came. I do want to say something about that though. Barb, Bob, and Mary Elizabeth Luca and others that were very committed to telling the untold stories of the Halifax explosion, connected with me, and besides that project I've been part of, that was a beautiful project, and they've helped me to continue to celebrate and remember my great grandparents and their children, my uncles and aunties. Several of them were injured, and several of them were killed at the Halifax explosion, and that again is a story that nobody is untold, and very few people wrote about it. And so it's been a long, many years, and with the help of Bob and Barb, I've been able to meet people that know little bits of it. That's how we try to bring back our stories, is to find out who knows a little bit of this, little of that, and then we work together on trying to tell it. So that story of my great grandparents is an incredible story that over time I was led, and that's where I say I was led by the ancestors who want that story told. And so I've been on this little journey with Bob and Barbara and others, Joe, Mike, getting the bits and pieces of some powerful parts of that story of my people, of my family. And soon we'll be able to tell it.
Thank you. But I have another question. We won't
Okay.
go quite yet. This is from
Okay.
Karen Cope.
Who?
Karen Cope, who is
Okay.
part of our Counter Memory Activism grant from NASA.
Mm-hmm.
Karen asks, first of all, thanking you for your stories and examples. And a comment, I feel as if you are offering us wisdom for the journey. How do we greet what feels like adversity? How do the lessons we encounter on the journey, the slowdowns and setbacks, really make the journey what it should be, what it needs to be? How do we make and live? And an additional comment, I also want to say how important it is to hear a woman talking about the journey, navigating it and guiding it.
Oh, well, then, was there a question in there?
The question, uh,
Matt,
is about how do the lessons we encounter on the journey
yeah.
make the journey?
Well,
Need to be.
there's no gain without pain, they say, and it's certainly painful. A lot of the experience that I have, it's very emotional. And I think it's harder once it's finished to show it to your own community. The fear of not being accepted is always there. And then when you show these things and everybody's, excited and welcoming and emotional, that's a really hard part of the journey. So while I'm making that, I try to stay close to the teachings of my ancestors and my relatives and my aunties and the basket makers, is to stay true to who you are and keep the truth of the story of the information. You are going to have lots of emotional breakdowns, of lots of emotions, like a roller coaster through it. And that is part of the teaching that you're receiving. It's not just that you're going to be able to make a film. You know, you have signed into a contract with yourself and with those that you are going to carefully tell their story. So it's not, there's nothing easy about it. And, you know, maybe the next book shouldn't be like my bloopers, but some of the trials and tribulations of starting films and having to deal with emotions and people and families that may not support the film. And, you know, there's so many things you must think about before you make a film about something. And the first thing is you need to think about the person and the family that is connected to the story and make sure that, you know, they're on board, because a lot of times the truth is really hard, even if it's coming from their own relative. But, you know, we're asking for settlers to tell their truth, not to start now in TRC time, tell the truth of the intersections with us and not try to, and not tell the one-sided story, but tell us the true times that happened with our people. And we need to do the same. And it's not always pleasant. So, you know, in the editing, you make your decisions. What's best? What should I take out? What should I not? Just, you know, put my helmet on and go for it. I think one of the greatest things I can put in my films is a little humor, no matter what the subject, whatever is going on, because that is one of the greatest things about being a Mi'kmaw. It's laughter, and everybody laughing, and laughing in the face of adversity, and trying always just to see the goodness in people and the goodness in life. And so one of the challenges I've had with some of my films is trying to, with people who are working with me, my editors, the people that are overseeing, you know, that the project is staying on time and whatever, is to convince them that there's pieces of this that have to stay. And often they don't get the point. And so some stays, some goes, but the proof is in the pudding. And when it's shown to a Mi'kmaw or an Indigenous audience, I get, you know, it's a reaffirmation that I was right, that is funny to us. And through our lens, looking at things through our lens is different, but it's also fun, and it can be understood as long as, you know, people are open to that we have our own sense of humor and we have our own way. That's it.
We will soon have to wrap up, but I
Yes.
would really need to know, because you spoke about sharing your films in your community and the difficulties that come with sharing it in your community. But I wonder how we as educators, like me here at King's, how I could meaningfully share your films with my students, and what can they derive from it. You know, with respect to peace and friendship treaties, we are all obligated by those treaties, right?
Yes.
So I just wonder if that's the lesson that they could learn by watching your films.
Well, I really think that a film that is completely made by the person from that culture who has cultural property and has knowledge and connection is the way everybody should be expecting the stories to be told. And if the story about us is being told by others, that has to be told. And I like to show the differences between a film, whether it has a huge budget and mine might have a little one, or someone I pick has a small budget or is not as famous. I like to show the difference between a film made by us, by Indigenous people, people from the community, and by non-Native people. And I try to point that out so that you also maybe sense that maybe not everything written in the history books is really the whole story. A lot of times it's biased and it comes from someone else's point of view. But like Dorota, you do a wonderful job, and you bring people to speak from the community. You ask hard questions, and you keep exposing us and bringing us to places where we can tell our story. And I think that's a great thing that you do. And I think from your own personal experience, you're able to have more compassion, and because you're from another place and then you came here just not too long ago, you might have a little bit more of an open mind about who we are. Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you. I just hope we can continue this conversation. Screen is okay, but it's also, very remote. So thank you so much for sharing this with us, Kathy. And again, this is just part of the conversation. We thank you so much, and I wish we could have a loud applause, but I would just do it myself.
Well, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, and see you soon.
Okay. Namoltis.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Catherine. Thank you. Walalan, thank you so much. We'll continue the conversation.
Right
Wonderful.
on.
Thanks so
to
much,
all of you.
Kathy.
Thank
Okay.
Safe drive.
All right, Walalan, thanks.